Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Give it a moment. My name is Matt Heimel. I'm the floodplain administrator for Missoula County. And as you can imagine, we're here to talk about the updated floodplain mapping for the Bitter River, Clark River, and Rock Creek. And we have local staff available, and we also have TNRC staff. And we have Tiffany Leiden with us to give us a quick presentation on the overall project. And then we'll break out the groups and you can ask individual questions in a little bit. So with that, turn over to Tiffany. We'll learn more about this project.
Thanks, Matt. All right. Technology doesn't work right. All right. There we go. All right. Well, hello and welcome. My name is Tiffany Leiden. I'm an outreach specialist with the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. We've got a lot of people here in person tonight, and we actually have a few folks that have joined us online, so welcome to those folks. I'm going to try to do double duty here with the folks online and in person. So I know some of you have gotten a chance to look at the draft maps that we've got here tonight. And we've got a lot of folks here to try to help address your individual property questions because everybody's property is unique and different situations. So we really want to give you time to do that. We've got a lot of folks here from different areas. We've got two folks here, Matt, who you just met, who started, and then Bailey, who work for Missoula County. So if you have specific questions for those folks, they're over there on the side. And we do, is anybody here from the city? Anybody have property in the city that's here? Okay, well, we also have two folks here from the city of Missoula. You can certainly talk to them. They're really familiar with this project. They're up there in the bleachers there. And then we have a number of folks from DNRC. Just raise your hand. And we also have some of the engineers who did the technical work on this project. So if you have those technical questions or really interested in what goes into these studies, those folks are here as well. Can you guys raise your hands, guys and gals? Okay, super. So lots of folks here to really get your individual questions answered tonight. I'm going to take just a few minutes and talk about what these maps are, what they mean, a little background about the project, and some of the next steps in the process. Before we then kind of give you time to look at your individual properties. Okay, so tonight we're talking about floodplain maps. And the purpose of floodplain mapping is to help identify areas at risk of flooding before flood events, so that we can keep people out of harm's way and reduce flood damage to buildings. Can you guys see okay? This is a collaborative effort. The city of Missoula, Missoula County, and actually Granite County, this project involves parts of Granite County as well, work together with the state and FEMA to help identify and reduce flood risks. Floodplain maps today are called flood insurance rate maps. They are official maps that are maintained by FEMA, and they get periodically updated, which is why we're here tonight. A couple things to note. What goes onto these maps is not just any old flood event. What gets put onto these maps are those areas at risk of flooding when we have what's called a 100-year flood event. Probably heard that term. It's kind of a misnomer because some people think if we have a 100-year flood event, we won't have another one for another 99 years. So that's kind of a bad way to think about it. A better way to think about this kind of a flood event is it's a flood event that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So that's why you've heard in other parts of the country, like, oh, they've had back-to-back flood events, or maybe they've never had a 100-year flood event yet. The other thing to keep in mind is that in a 1% flood event or 100-year flood event, we're going to use those terms interchangeably, there may be localized conditions like a blocked culvert or a bunch of down trees that may cause the water to behave a little differently in spots. But by and large, these maps should represent those areas that have a high risk of flooding when we have a 100-year or 1% flood event. These maps, floodplain maps, actually get used for a lot of different purposes. They are used by Missoula County and the city of Missoula for where their local floodplain regulations apply. The city and county have floodplain regulations that apply to the areas shown on these maps, and they require floodplain permits for those areas. Because they do that, federally backed flood insurance is available to anybody in Missoula County. These maps are also used locally for community planning purposes, to look at development and growth, used for planning and subdivision purposes. For you folks out in the county, for septic permits, these maps get looked at and used for those purposes. They also get used by mortgage lenders to determine if a house or a building that they're financing has a risk of being flooded. And as you can also probably guess, they get used for emergency management purposes. Are there going to be roads that are going to be overtopped in a big flood event? Are there neighborhoods that are going to be blocked that we need to look at evacuation routes and such? So given all those things, we recognize that these maps really should accurately reflect what's at risk of flooding. So we recognize that sometimes they need to be periodically updated. The city of Missoula and Missoula County have actually had floodplain maps since the 1970s. You know, nobody's here from the city, but I just put it up here. That map in the upper left-hand, right-hand corner is one of the city of Missoula's first floodplain maps, produced in 1974. They used the information they had available at the time to try to depict areas that are at risk of being flooded, using the information that they had at that time. In the 80s, there was some flood study work done in Missoula County, and revised maps were produced for a lot of the county. And that's that map kind of down in the upper lower right corner. In 2015, those 1980 maps were converted into digital format, looking like that map there that you see there at the bottom. I think it's really important to note that even though it says 2015, what's on those maps is mostly based on information and mapping done in the 1980s. There's been a couple of updates here and there, a couple of small revision areas. One notable one folks might know is when the Milltown Dam got removed, there was certainly physical changes to that area, so there was a small revision there. But for looking at it, there has been no large comprehensive flood studies done for the Clark Fork River, the Bitterroot River, or Rock Creek since the 1980s. So a number of years ago, the county started requesting updated, better information, and we started working together with the city and FEMA to try to get some funding and conduct some updated flood studies. So in total, we're doing flood studies and looking to update maps on about 100 stream miles in Missoula County. So that's the Clark Fork River from kind of end to end through the county, the whole Bitterroot River in Missoula County, and the piece of Rock Creek that's in Missoula County, as well as some stuff in Granite County, but we won't focus on that tonight. These studies will eventually replace your existing floodplain maps with new updated information. If you're interested in what goes into a flood study, how they're conducted, how the maps eventually get produced, we do have some handouts here, and I forgot to bring one up here, but, oh yeah. Thank you. I'll come back. If you're interested in that, there's a handout that's available around the room that kind of talks through what kind of information and data goes into them and all the analysis that happens. And we also do have some of the engineers that did the study work. If you're really interested in kind of diving into those details, we've got those folks here. I will say if there are questions that you don't get answered tonight that we can't answer here, make sure we get your information down. We want to make sure and get back to you with answers to your questions if we can't answer them tonight. Okay. For folks online, that flood study handout is actually on the project website that I'll go over in just a bit. So the results of these flood studies we've been working on for a couple of years are the draft floodplain maps. And we're now at the stage where these draft maps are ready for review. And that's why we're here tonight, because public review of these draft maps is really an important part of the process. The maps are not expected to be finalized for a while, probably a couple of years from now. But we wanted to get them out for people to look at very early in the process because your review is an important part of that. A lot of the information that went into the studies, the draft maps, the reports, and a lot of the details, you can actually find on this website here. And there's a couple of ways to get to this. For those of you that got a postcard in the mail, you can use that link there on the postcard, or you can type in this address here right at the top. That takes you directly to that spot. The folks around the room can also get you there if you want to look at that tonight. That's available for you too. On this website is a link to the map viewer that shows all of the draft maps. So I'm going to walk through what that looks like. So if you're doing that either later tonight at one of the stations around the room or at home, you kind of know what you're looking at. So what I'm going to go through is what happens when you click on this draft map viewer box here. When you first open that up, it's going to default to the draft floodplain information, which makes sense because that's what we're all interested in looking at here. You can, when you get there, there's a magnifying glass here, and you can type in your address, or you can zoom in or pan around to the spot that you're looking for. When you're looking at the maps, the blue area, kind of from edge to edge here, is what is proposed as the 100-year or that 1% floodplain. That's the area that has a high risk of flooding when we have a 1% or 100-year flood event. So that's the area where the county and city require floodplain permits for any new building or development. And they do that so that what is getting built there moving forward is going to be safe from flood events and not going to impact somebody else negatively when we have a flood event. It's also the area where if you have a mortgage on your house or your building, your lender is going to require flood insurance when these maps go into effect to protect their investment as they're loaning you that money. Inside of that blue 100-year floodplain on these maps, you're going to see an additional zone depicted as a kind of red color. That's the floodway portion of the floodplain. That's typically where we see the deepest and fastest moving water in a flood event. For that reason, no new buildings are allowed in the floodway portion of the 100-year floodplain. You'll also see a couple other colors on these maps. The tan area that you see here, in this picture is kind of right in the bottom center there. That's also depicting some flood risk, but it's not as high as the 100-year floodplain. That's what we call a moderate flood risk. So you could get some real shallow flooding in there in a 100-year flood event, or you may not actually get water in there until you have a much bigger flood event called a 5-year flood event that happens less often. So it has a flood risk, it's just a little bit more moderate. Outside of those areas, so anything that doesn't have that shaded area is considered a low flood risk based on the draft information. Low flood risk does not mean no flood risk. And I think this is a really important year for us all to recognize, is that looking at some of the flooding that happened in our state over in the Southwest in the Yellowstone area, larger flood events, larger than 100 and 500-year events do occur, and they can cause significant damage to buildings and houses. So for that reason, flood insurance is available to anybody in the county and in the state.
The location of that map there?
Good question. The location of this map, I just clipped it out of the viewer.
Looks like north of Lolo.
It's the Clark Fork, it looks like here.
Yeah.
So
That's up by French County.
it's up by Frenchtown. But we'll definitely take a look at kind of your spot, so you can do that. Okay, there's another color that you'll see on some of these maps, is a yellow color, and those are other floodplains in the county that are mapped that we are not updating as part of this study. So Lolo Creek is one that has existing mapped floodplains we're not updating. Rattlesnake Creek, a bunch of the other ones too. So that's what that's in there for. Or that's what you'll see that. Okay. When you're in the viewer, you can do a couple of different things on here. Things, if you zoom in far enough, you'll start to see these lines appear across the floodplain. And what those are the flood elevations, how high the water is expected to get at that location when you're moving upstream or downstream. So that's an elevation above sea level. The other thing you can do here is look at what are the current floodplain maps showing. If you look at the tabs on the left side when you're using the viewer, set the side so you guys can see that a little bit. If you click on tab 2, what that will show you is what the current floodplain maps are. Remember the ones that have, say, 2015 on them, but are really based on information from the 80s. This is what your the current maps are. Tab 3 is actually just a comparison between the draft floodplains and the current floodplains. So you can kind of overlay them, and it overlays it for you rather. And so it's just going to compare those two. Anywhere that you see in blue on the map, and you can zoom in for this is just an overview of the whole county here. Anywhere you see in blue on this tab 3 are areas that are currently mapped on your maps as 100-year floodplain. And based on our new study, the results are that that area is still at risk of flooding in a 100-year flood event. So those areas are proposed to remain 100-year floodplain. So no change. The areas shown in green are areas that on your current maps, based on the information they used from the 80s, they were mapped as 100-year floodplain. Based on our new study information, maybe they're high enough, the water's not expected to get in those locations as once previously thought. So we're proposing to remove those areas from the 100-year floodplain. Color red is the opposite of that. It's not mapped on your current map as 100-year floodplain, but based on the new study results, it really is at risk of getting flooded. So we're proposing that those areas would be added to the floodplain when these maps go into place. That makes sense? Okay. Tab 4 is very similar to that, but it's just looking at that floodway portion of the floodplain. Remember that deepest and fastest moving water part. So it's just doing that comparison to the current floodway. Okay, so I talked about those yellow areas. I wanted to highlight that because we're here in Lolo today, and this is a good spot to sort of show that. We're updating, we have draft information for the Bitterroot River. We are not updating the existing floodplain map mapping for Lolo Creek or other ones. So what you're gonna see in some of these spots on that draft tab is the floodplain from, like in this case, this is the floodplain from Lolo Creek. If Lolo Creek had a 100-year flood event, this is what would get wet, and then it joins into the Bitterroot. So the mapping of the Bitterroot, this is the area expected to be flooded when the Bitterroot floods. So those eventually will get mapped together, but those are showing those extents. I'm just going to repeat your question for folks online. A good question. He asked if we still got a notification for if we were in the yellow. Is that right? Yeah. I believe the county just tried to send to anybody that was in the proposed 100 or 500-year floodplain and not in the yellow. But I could be wrong if there's a little bit. Okay. They did not intentionally send any postcards to folks in the Lolo Creek floodplain. But if you're close, maybe you have some property that's touching a little bit of both. We could definitely kind of look into that afterwards. Okay, let's look at that afterwards and we'll try to figure that out. Great. Okay. Oh, and then I guess I just put this in here to kind of show that. So if we go to those tabs 3 or 4, it's not going to show the Lolo Creek floodplain. So it's just looking at the comparison of the 100-year floodplain for Bitterroot River. Okay. All right, so before you leave tonight, I just want to make sure that you get a chance to look at and know where your property is or your house is in relation to the draft floodplain and those risk areas. Again, when you're looking at the maps, that blue area is proposed as the draft 100-year floodplain. Has a high risk of flooding when we have a 1% or 100-year flood event, where the county and city require floodplain permits, and where a lender will require you to carry flood insurance once the new maps go into place. If you are have property in that blue area, we do have a handout here that kind of walks through what does it mean for me to own property in that area. So make sure you pick that up. This is kind of color coded so you can kind of remember if I'm in the blue. That's what I want to make sure and pick up tonight. If you have property or a portion of your property in that floodway portion of the floodplain, we do have a red informational sheet that talks about what does it mean to own property in the floodway portion of the floodplain. So you're welcome to pick those up for neighbors too if you want, and we do have those online on that project website too. You can get to those as well. Again, it's not showing up very well on this screen here, but if you're in that part of the map that's proposed as a more moderate risk area, so real shallow flooding or not getting flooded until unless we have a really big flood event, 500-year flood event. If you are going to do some new building in that area, I do encourage you to talk to the county because they may require a floodplain permit just based on elevation there. So there's kind of it depends answer for that. So make sure you visit with Bailey or Matt for that question. Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to go over these sheets in detail, but just kind of a high-level overview of what does it mean to own property in a 100-year floodplain. Again, the city and county, that's where the city and county floodplain regulations apply. Because there are regulations there, it doesn't mean you can't build in those areas. It just means that you need to build more safely following those regulations. Primarily the biggest one that folks, yeah, go ahead.
Are they going to use the map before it's actually done out for permitting purposes?
Great question. So the question was, are they going to use the maps before they're officially adopted for permitting purposes? Let's tell you what, I'm gonna hold that and then we're gonna have them answer that at the end, but yeah, okay. All right, so primarily kind of the biggest one is that if you're building a new building, that first floor of that building needs to be 2 feet above those flood elevations on the new map. So you think of it as a safety thing, you're high and dry if you do get a flood event. And then again, no new buildings are permitted in that floodway portion. What about flood insurance? We do have some information here, so if you have specific questions about that, I encourage you to talk to Shailia, who's here. But kind of in summary, if your building is in that, your house, or maybe a building that you have a mortgage on, your lender will require you to purchase flood insurance once the new maps go into effect. So that is definitely a time frame that will not happen before that unless you're in the current floodplain. A couple things to note, renters can purchase flood insurance just like homeowners can, it's just with their contents. And homeowners insurance does not cover flooding. So flood insurance is really an important way for people to protect their investment in the case of a flood event. One thing I want to mention is the county participates, as well as the city, in a national program that recognizes their local floodplain efforts, and because of that, flood insurance policies in Missoula County actually automatically receive a discount compared to other counties or other areas that don't participate in that. So that's a good thing that's in place for Missoula County residents. Okay, so here's kind of where we're at in the process. I said we've been working on this project for a couple of years. We're kind of in the middle part of it. We wanted to get these maps in your hands early. We're at the stage where the draft data is ready for your review. We're still a few years out from the maps replacing your current maps. And the reason for that is they go through a lengthy public review process. Part of that will be an actual formal comment and appeal period that'll happen sometime in 2023. But I would encourage you, if you have to look at the maps, if you see things that you think are an error or things that just don't look right, we want your feedback on that. So you can provide that to me at DNRC or to the city or county floodplain administrators. And their contact information is on that website, and we've got their cards at the table here. So we encourage your feedback. We really want to welcome that and have you look at those early in this process. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just wrap it up for those that are joining online. Thanks everybody for joining via Zoom. And then, so I'm going to just stop this. Maybe. All right, thanks.
Great. Once again, thanks to everyone joining us virtually for tonight's public open house. Want to make sure they can't hear me over there. Right, so if you have any questions, we'll turn it over to Nadine to answer those here in a second.
Thanks, Randall. Yeah, so those of us, or those that are still online, it looks like we have 3. Does anybody have any questions? Would you like to look at your property? Is there anything that I can help you with?